We'll take the prayer concerns that you may have, and I'll share with you the ones that were mentioned in Sunday school, and then we'll take any others that you may have. We need to remember the Jimmy Davidson family, the flood victims over in Alexander County, Kelly O'Toole, Betty Lell, Dorothy Thronberg, Tim McGuire, Betty Moritz, and Cindy Cosby. And so, are there any others that you want to add to the list this evening? Okay. All right. Remember Allen Church. Any others? Okay. Continue to remember Barbara. Supposed to have a PET scan this past week, and machine tore up, so she has it this week, plus the results of that test and reconstructive surgery. So remember Barbara. Any others? Okay. Say that again. Okay. And the last name was McCoy, like Hatfield and McCoy. You make whatever connections you can. Any others? Yep. Michael's having a heart cath on Wednesday, so just remember him. He's been having some challenges lately with his health. Any others? Didn't see him sitting back there talking about you in the third person. Johanna's back there. He don't see you. Quit laughing at me, Larry. All right. Any others? All right. Well, if there's not any more, we'll get started with our study tonight. And so, last week, let me ask this: did anybody not get the last of the Jehovah's Witness study where we were talking about witnessing to Jehovah's Witnesses and need it? We handed that out last week. Raise your hand. Is there anybody else that needs one? Okay. Chelsea, can I recruit your help? Even though I didn't hold him under till the bubbles stopped like you asked. No. I'll hand that off to you. Just raise your hand if you need the last one out of the Jehovah's Witnesses study, and Chelsea will get that to you. We overworked Joseph this evening handing out the Mormon study. And does anybody need the Mormon study from last week? Anybody not get it? Okay, Andy, come here. Yeah. If anybody needs it didn't sort it when it copied it. You'll have to give them one of the last and one of the first. And that first one's right there. Anybody need the Mormon study from last week? I'm going to be a good teacher and give you the answer sheet, okay? Give you the one with the answers. I've got a few of those. Could be a mean teacher and give you the one with the blanks and make you go back and watch me talk a lot from last week on the internet. But I want good reviews when it comes, into the semester, that sort of thing. To help with that, I'm handing out candy next week. No. All right. Well, does anybody need the notes for tonight, the fill in the blank for tonight? We have those. Everybody have a copy of those? Thank you. All right. Well, tonight we're going to be, last week we just sort of talked a little bit of an overview about the Mormons, and tonight we're going to be talking about their sources of authority. And unlike the Jehovah's Witnesses, who basically have just one, which is their New World Translation, the Mormons have much more than the Book of Mormon. They actually have 4 books that they regard as holy scriptures, if you want to refer to it that way. Normally we think about the Book of Mormon, and I remember years ago seeing on TV where you could order the Book of Mormon. They would, if you called, they would tell you, about the Mormon faith and send you a copy of the Book of Mormon. It looks, the ones they showed on TV look a lot nicer than this paperback version I have from 1960 something. But nevertheless, there's more to the Mormon faith as far as the scriptures go than just the Book of Mormon. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit this evening. And so as we get started, we're going to look, they have what they call 4 books that are their standard works, okay? And so not that the 66 books of the Protestant Bible is not enough for us to read through, study, and learn God's commands. They have essentially a copy of the Bible plus some other books. And so there's even more to learn and to really see about there. And so, in the Mormons, they claim that they have these 4 standard works. One of those is the Book of Mormon, as I talked about a minute ago. But of these, only the Bible is considered, as we talked about last week, accepted with, corruptions, or accepted with exemptions, I guess you would say. And so they do consider the Bible to be corrupted and will accept it with certain qualifications that we're going to talk about tonight. And those 4 books are the Bible, which is the King James Version only, and even then it has to have been correctly translated by their prophet Joseph Smith. They also have the Book of Mormon. They have the Doctrines and Covenants, and then the Pearl of Great Price. And so we're going to talk a little bit about each of those tonight. And so the first one we're going to look at is the Bible. And we would, as I said, they use the King James Version of the Bible, but they require that it be the Joseph Smith translation of the King James Bible, meaning that they have essentially taken, like the Jehovah's Witnesses did, taken the Bible and then written in their doctrines and added and taken away things that disagreed or added things to agree with their doctrines. That's the gist of what has went on there. But what they have done is they have this Joseph Smith translation, and when I say that, it is because before he was killed, as we learned about last week, he had started in this translation of the Bible, and so he had the opportunity to adjust some of the things in the King James Bible, but they, as we'll talk about in a minute, they don't have a completed version of that because he did die earlier than expected. So in your notes there, you see that in their book called Doctrines and Covenants. And they have chapter and verse sort of designations like we do in the Bible. It says that Joseph Smith was to complete a new translation of the Bible, and that's what he was working on when he died. And he worked on this translation, and I say translation very loosely. He did not go back and examine the original Hebrew text or the original Greek text. Basically what he did was took the King James Version and cut out some, copied and pasted and, cut in and out and added to sections of the King James Bible. But he worked on that for 3 years, from 1830 to 1833 when he died, and it was never published during his lifetime. Now, as you see there in the notes, the LDS Church, they do not currently publish this work in its entirety. Now, let me ask you something. If this man is supposed to be some high holy prophet of your faith system, and he has this written record that you have as much as he was able to complete, would you not want to share it in its entirety if he holds such a high place in your faith system? Makes sense, right? I mean, this is your prophet. This is the founder of your faith system. and you're not willing to produce the entire version of what he edited and translated, as they put it, it makes you a little skeptical as to why they wouldn't do that. They do, as it says there, publish excerpts as well as footnotes in the KJV version of the Bible that the LDS Church publishes. So because my understanding is that with the King James Version, it's in the public domain, so it's sort of fair game as far as being able to be published and reprinted and things like that. And so what they have done is they have their own version of the King James Bible, which some of those things he has changed and edited, but they put his notes in as footnotes and stuff that would help them interpret what those scriptures are. And so obviously it would be hard to get your hands on one of those unless you were probably inside the LDS Church. Now, his translation is more appropriately called a revision by the LDS Church. It's all about optics, if you want to think about it in that regard. When it comes to a lot of the cults, what you will find is that when things that they originally believed were in style, in favor, in fashion, when those things grow out of fashion, what can you do if you're making it up as you go? Oh, well, we didn't really believe that. That was interpreted wrong, and we really meant this. And so we can change this view to this view. And one of the things that we talked about last week, you saw it in the cartoons the cartoon that we watched last week. One of the early beliefs of the Mormon Church that they have since, especially in the time of the civil rights movements in the United States, they went from saying that the African races, those with dark complexions like that, were basically those that were cursed in one thing and another in their belief system. Now they say that that's not the case, and the reason they can say that is because they're making it up as they go. I mean, I'm just calling a spade when that's the case. And so that's what they have done is they have revised things sort of as they have gone. As they've gone along. Now, what we see here is that Joseph Smith basically went through the King James Bible and changed text that he didn't agree with, or he would put things in to support his own doctrines and teachings and things like that. So what I want you to do is I want you to turn with me in your Bible to Genesis 50:33 and see a particular verse that was changed by Joseph Smith to point to his a prophecy about him, about his own birth, in Genesis 50:33. Your Bible doesn't go to Genesis 50:33? What kind of mistaken Bible do you have? Daryl, evidently they don't have it, so can you show us what it says in Genesis 50:33 of the Joseph Smith translation? It says, "And that seer which I bless, and they that seek to destroy him shall be confounded. For this promise I give unto you, for I will remember you from generation to generation, and his name shall be called Joseph." And then it goes on from there. But this is in the King James Version published by the Mormon Church that is part of this Joseph Smith translation. I say translation, it's excerpts of his, where he has changed it. And as I said earlier, when the Bible did not fit their doctrines, you either erase it and leave it out, or you fix it to where it adds in. And you add to the scriptures. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't there something in the Bible that says you're not supposed to add to or take away from the Bible? So yeah, in the book of Revelation. And so this just shows you, the changes that they have made. They went so far, and I don't know how much further the book of Genesis in chapter 50 goes in the Mormon version of the Bible, but they've obviously added at least 6 or 7 verses there to what is in the standard translation of the Bible. And so you just see that this is a prime example of what we've talked about all along. About, even with the Jehovah's Witnesses, we talked about how they would add words or change words and, things like that. This is just another example of the same thing. And this is in the Mormon Church. Now, The Mormon Church or the LDS Church, their statement about the Bible, or their understanding of the Bible is that we believe the Bible to be the Word of God as far as it is translated correctly. And guess who has to translate it for them for it to be translated correctly? Joseph Smith. And so again, if it has to be translated correctly by your prophet, why will you not put out his writings in its entirety and only give you little snippets? Makes you wonder what he wrote in some of those other things. And so we see that they use the King James Version of the Bible as long as it is translated correctly, as they put it. And his alterations and revisions are what make it translated correctly. One of their other books, as we mentioned, was the Book of Mormon. And if you're ever curious to look at it and read some of it, you're more than welcome to check it out here, and I'll be glad to let you read it or look at it and things like that. But the Book of Mormon actually contains information about a period of 1,000 years from 600 BC to 400 AD. So that's the time span of the Book of Mormon. And so if you open it up and start reading it, it tells you basically, from what I was able to discern, not from reading it specifically, but from reading about the Book of Mormon, is that the time frame that this starts is just prior to the fall of Jerusalem to King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, and so what you read about in this covers the time. But the fall of Jerusalem was 586 BC to Nebuchadnezzar. That's when Daniel and all of them went to Babylon. Well, just prior to the fall of Jerusalem, that's when the Book of Mormon supposedly picks up with this gentleman that we'll be talking about, and it covers a time period for the next essentially 1,000 years from that time frame forward. And now, the Book of Mormon also covers the history of these two great civilizations that were known as the Nephites and the Lamanites, who fought against one another for centuries, as it says there. And these two civilizations were supposedly Jewish. They were supposed to be descendants of the Israelites. Now, I did try to find. Well, I'm going to get ahead of myself if I share that. I'll tell that in a minute. But these two groups were supposedly members of the Jewish nation that sort of broke off prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in the days of Nebuchadnezzar. And so we do know that the Lamanites were supposedly the ancestors of the American Indians, the Native Americans. And so, the Lamanites were supposedly here and here in our country, and these two civilizations supposedly lived on the North American continent. And the thing I was going to say a minute ago was that I tried to do a little research. It's bad when Google won't tell you answers about a religion that should be very easy to find out, because one of the questions I had was, how did the Nephites get to North America? And then I changed that and said, how did the Lamanites get to North America? And it's not that they're, I don't think that they're being deceitful about it. It's just you can't find it. And so what does that tell you? If it is that hard, I mean, I checked different ways and looked at different links and all this, and the Nephites were supposedly the descendants of a prophet in Israel, and what they did was they supposedly went east. They went east through the Arabian Desert, went east until they basically got to what we would say is China, Southeast Asia, Japan, that area. Then they built a boat and came to the Americas. They came to the west coast rather than the east coast like most explorers from Europe. And so that's how the Nephites got to the North American continent. I could not find out how the Lamanites got here. I tried, and I looked, and I can't give you an answer, so I just don't know. Because that was one of the things, because some of the other things that we're going to talk about tonight, I'm like, well, how did they get here? Because they say that those two groups, and there were other groups too. There were Jaredites and Mulekites that were other people groups that came to or that were in North America as well, that the Book of Mormon claims. But anyway, I was trying to figure out how they got here based on some other things that we were going to talk about tonight, and there's just you just can't find it. I mean, Google can tell you about anything, it seems like, anymore, but when it won't tell you something specific like that about a religion, it ought to raise some red flags for you. So the Book of Mormon, when you read in it, it does tell you about these 38 great cities that were supposedly existing here on the North American continent during this time period from about 600 AD to 600 BC to 400 AD. And so there were supposedly these 38 great cities, and you can even read there at the bottom, it talks about how the whole face of the land had become covered with buildings, and the people were as numerous almost as it were the sand of the sea. Fine workmanship of wood in buildings and in machinery, and also in iron and copper and brass and steel makings of manners of tools. So we're talking about the equivalent of 19th century cities. That's what it's talking about, right? I mean, you're talking about big wood and steel construction buildings. Sounds a lot like science fiction from the 1900s. And Joseph Smith was in the 19th century, from the 1800s. And so what we see is that, he makes these claims in the Book of Mormon, and it has made its way into being, the gospel, so to speak, for the Mormon faith. And so they supposedly had these huge cities, huge buildings, all of these 2,000 years ago. And, they had all of these people all over the continent. Now, we know that the North American, or the Native Americans here in North America, they were a lot more populous than we realized when we first came to the continent, but they were, shortly before the arrival of Western Europeans. Lee was telling me this the other day when we were talking. There was actually before the major arrival of the colonial settlers, there was a major pandemic in North America that wiped out a large portion of the Native American population. And so he's not wrong in the regards that there was a large population here, but they were North American Native Americans. They weren't Jewish people that had somehow, made it across the Pacific Ocean. And so, nevertheless, it is kind of interesting when you read this and try to relate it to what we know about world history. Now, if you flip over onto the back side of your page there, it tells us at the very top of it that the Book of Mormon teaches that Jesus, after the ascension, came and visited these two civilizations, the Nephites and the Lamanites, and preached the gospel to these ancient inhabitants. And so, that's the basis, that's the connection of the Book of Mormon to the Orthodox Christian faith. Not only do they use the Christian Bible and, make it fit their doctrines, but they also have the connection to the Christian faith, because they say that Jesus, after he ascended, came to North America and shared the gospel with these two people groups. Now, your notes go on to tell you a little bit about the origin of the Book of Mormon. And last week in the cartoon that we watched, and I'll have to tell you this, we watched that cartoon last week, and Reed texted me one day this week. I can't remember. I think it was one day he came home from work, and his nephew Talon was just all upset. He wanted to go to church, and he wanted to watch cartoons with that tall guy that talks on the stage. And so he was all upset because you got to watch cartoons last week and he didn't. And so anyway, we were watching that cartoon, that excerpt from the Godmakers movie, and it tells us a little bit about the origin in that. It showed about the battle between them and how those golden plates were buried and stuff. But we'll talk just a little bit about that tonight. Because the Book of Mormon, allegedly was put down on golden plates by Mormon, a commander-in-chief of the Nephites. Now, the Nephites and the Lamanites, they were fighting, and after completing his part, he gave the plates to his son Moroni, and he went and had them. He hid them. He buried them, as Joseph Smith says. He buried them on the hill Cumorah in upstate New York, between Syracuse and near Manchester, New York, not far outside of Syracuse. And so 1,400 years later, Moroni shows up in a vision or appeared to Joseph Smith and told him where he could find these plates. And, as we talked about last week, that Joseph Smith claimed to be a descendant of Jesus Christ from, one of his multiple wives, either Martha, Mary, or Mary Magdalene. And he claimed direct to be a descendant of his. But after being told where these plates are 4 years later, again, one of those things that would cause you to question something is, where there are gold plates that will start a worldwide revolution in the area of religion, and you sit on it for 4 years. Why in the world would you do that? So, again, something else to question. But nevertheless, after those 4 years, he went and dug those up, supposedly. And then for him to interpret these golden plates, he pulled a Wizard of Oz on them. He sits behind the curtain and looks through his hat, through some seer stones, as he referred to them, and basically, the idea I get from what you read there is it was like when you were a kid and you got the 3D glasses out of the box of cereal and you put it on and you read the back of the box and you decode everything. It's essentially that idea. That's the idea that he gave. Now, he's sitting behind a curtain. He could have had his foot propped up, reading a book and just telling a story as he went, for all we know. But what happened was somebody was on the other side of the curtain dictating everything that he said, and that's what developed into the Book of Mormon. Now, there was, somebody mentioned, I think it was last week, somebody joked about Scientology. I think it was Mike mentioned Scientology, as one of those cults and things that, we could look at, and we were joking about it and everything. But, the Scientology cult was started by a science fiction writer. I mean, that's the reality of it. Well, essentially what Joseph Smith has done is written a science fiction type of work in the Book of Mormon when you read it, because there is no, as we'll see in a little bit, there is no justification for it, and some of the stuff is just so outlandish that it can't be real, it can't be true. And so anyway, he gets the Book of Mormon by dictating it to someone on the other side of the curtain, and it is sadly similar to the Wizard of Oz. But one of the things that you would say is, if this is true, as the LDS Church claims that it is, if this were true, you would want to find archaeological evidence. You would want to find proof that this is true. Now, there is archaeological evidence to support the things that we read in the Scriptures. There is new archaeological evidence being found all the time in Israel, and in different places. When we were studying the book of Nehemiah, I had found an article that told about a wall from the time of Nehemiah that was found that had been rebuilt around the city of Jerusalem. And that was archaeological evidence that supported what we read in the book of Nehemiah and what we studied. And so you would think that if this book right here were true, that there would regularly, with some regularity, be archaeological evidence that would be supporting what you read in here. And, the problem with it is there is absolutely none. Again, because it's a work of science fiction. It's the work of a man telling a story to start a following. But nevertheless, there's not, one shred of evidence that supports this, because, as it says in this book, it says that the whole land became covered with buildings. And that wasn't even until the 1900s that really became a reality in the United States, not counting Canada and Mexico. But just in the United States, even till the late 1800s, there were vast parts of the United States that were not even seen by, white man by that point. And so, the idea that 2,000 years ago, the whole North American continent was covered with buildings of steel and wood and all of this. It sounds like nothing more than a made-up story. One of the interesting things you'll see there that sort of goes against the Book of Mormon, that really shines a negative light on it, is that iron, steel, glass, and silk were not introduced to the North American continent until after the arrival of European explorers, such as Christopher Columbus. The ones from England and Portugal and Spain. When those explorers arrived, they brought those things with them. Obviously, there was wood here, and obviously the Native Americans used wood for different things. But one of the things was that the compass had not even been invented when Joseph Smith says it was used here on the North American continent by the Lamanites and the Nephites. I had to go look that one up. The compass wasn't invented until the 1100s, until the 12th century. And so that was even, 700 years after he said that the Book of Mormon was happening. And so it just shows you that there some of the things that are claimed in it do not work. Yet he says the Nephi had a compass, and there were all of these great buildings. There was a former BYU professor, Thomas Ferguson. He started this the Department of Archaeology at BYU, Brigham Young University, which is named for the second leader of the Mormon faith. And after 25 years, he found no evidence. I did do a little research on that to make sure that I had that information right. He was the person who founded it and led it for 25 years. And after finding no archaeological evidence, he went from being the leader of this, the president of the society that did their archaeological work, to being their secretary. So if this world-renowned archaeologist cannot find evidence for to prove the Book of Mormon being true, and he goes from leading it, because if you believe in it, you're going to lead it, right? And you're going to want to prove it and do all of this. After a quarter of a century, he finds no evidence, and then he just sort of steps away from that role. I mean, what does that tell you about the historicity of the Book of Mormon? It shows you that it's not true. Corrections and contradictions and errors in the Book of Mormon, really since its first publishing, 190 years ago? Since then, the first edition has undergone extensive corrections. So let me ask you, if your prophet gives you this book that he says was given to him on these golden plates, and he translated it for all of mankind to know and all of that, if your prophet gives it to you, why do you have to change it? Maybe it doesn't meet with the times in which you live, changing things about different races and things like that, or maybe things that were in fashion then are taboo now, and you have to make corrections, you have to make changes, and that's essentially what they have done. When it comes to the Book of Mormon, they have plagiarized the King James Version of the Bible with approximately 25,000 words. They've directly copied 25,000 words out of the King James Version of the Bible and inserted it not into their version of the Bible, but into the Book of Mormon. And if you're curious, there's like 700, I had to look this up too, I was sort of curious about this. There's over 783,000 words in the King James Version of the Bible, meaning that they have plagiarized about a third of it to go into the Book of Mormon. Not a third, I'm sorry, 3% of the King James Version of the Bible has been taken from the Bible and inserted into the Book of Mormon to beef it up and to probably make some cross-referencing things work well for them. And so that talks about the Book of Mormon, okay? And so we've talked about their version of the Bible. We've talked about their Book of Mormon. And the last two that we have, we'll take just a few minutes because there's not a whole lot to share with you about it. But the next one is the Doctrines and Covenants. That's the book that they have. And it is primarily a collection of revelations that were supposedly given to Joseph Smith by God. And although, again, you have these revelations from your prophet, the founder of your faith, well, evidently it wasn't good enough, and there were other people that were his successors who added to those revelations. Now think about that. Think about the danger in that, the heresy that can occur when what is given to you as the gospel, as your main belief system, if it can be changed by people that come after you, think about the heresy that can happen because of that. That's a danger that we have to watch for even in the church, because we have to make sure that what the Word said 2,000 years ago is what the Word says today, and that's what we're teaching, the same thing, that we're not interpreting it in light of our culture and in light of what's going on in the world today, but instead what the Word says is what the Word says, and that's what we live by. We don't, we let the Word change us, we don't change the Word. And the difference is in the Jehovah's Witnesses, in the Mormons, and other cults, they don't let their word change them. Instead, they change their word to fit what needs to go on in their time frame. Now, besides the Doctrines and Covenants, they also have this work called the Pearl of Great Price. And this includes things like the Book of Abraham, Joseph Smith's retranslation from the Gospel of Matthew, and even Joseph Smith's history. And so, again, you've got a retranslation of the Gospel of Matthew. And, so it's again, an opportunity for them to write in to their works what their doctrines, what they want their doctrines to be. And so that final thing there in your notes is kind of interesting. It says, other than formatting changes made prior to 1921. Okay, now think about this. The Pearl of Great Price has been written, and it's got things about Joseph Smith, even from his day. Okay, so it's been 90 years since Joseph Smith had started this. And other than just some formatting changes, which ain't a big deal, that's just the way it lines up on the paper, 2 columns, 1 column, that sort of thing. Prior to that, no changes were made until April of 1976, when 2 items of Revelation were added. Not the book of Revelation. This is divine revelation that they have received. They put it into the Pearl of Great Price. And what ended up happening was 3 years later, they felt that it was a better fit for the book, the Doctrines and Covenants. And so they took it out of the Pearl of Great Price and then moved it over there. And they put it over there. And now it has become, sections 137 and 138 in the Doctrines and Covenants. But notice that last sentence. In the present edition, some changes have been made to bring the text into conformity with earlier documents. Earlier documents include the Book of Mormon and include the King James Version with the Joseph Smith translation. So that's according to the LDS Church. So what they're very plainly saying is, our Doctrines and Covenants and our Pearl of Great Price did not line up with the Book of Mormon and what we have believed for all these years, and so now we've changed some things to make it work, to make it fit. And so, the powerful thing that we see here is that, yes, they have four books that are their source of authority. It's what they believe in and where they get their beliefs from. But the challenging thing here is that we see how easily they can manipulate what they believe by just saying, oh, we have new divine revelation. And so we're going to change the Book of Mormon. Or we've got divine revelation, we're going to change the Doctrines and Covenants. Rather than saying, okay, this is what God says in His Word, and we're going to allow it to change our lives. And so, very interesting when you read it and really get beyond the facade that you see when you really think about the Mormon Church and how, we don't have a ton of Mormons around here. I know there are some that work in the local school system and things like that, but nowhere near as much as we would have if we lived in somewhere like Utah or something like that. But they promote a very family-friendly persona and things like that, and that's all well and great. But when you see how they can manipulate their beliefs by saying, well, it just didn't fit with what we believed earlier, now we're going to change it, it ought to cause you to really question some of the stuff that they believe. And so that's what we'll start looking at next week. Next Sunday we will look at the first section of what they believe. in regards to the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And so we'll start looking at what they believe in regards to that. Then, like we did with the Jehovah's Witnesses, the next time we look at their beliefs, we'll look at their view of heaven, hell, and salvation. And when we look at that, their idea of heaven is basically a paradise, and also that you're able to, if you attain a certain level here on earth, you can be a god like Elohim, as we saw in the video last week, and essentially that you'll have your own planet with a whole bunch of spirit wives. And I'll have to find out if, for the women, they're obviously not going to have spirit wives. So do they just end up being a spirit wife for one of these, gods? I mean, I'll have to try. Gina, was that a thumbs up or, thumbs down? I'm trying, Neil. I'm trying, man. No. But I'll look that up because I hadn't thought about that till just now, because obviously if you're a female believer in the Mormon faith, you're not going to be a spirit god with a whole bunch of husbands, because that's not what they teach. Husbands can have a lot of wives, but wives can't have a whole lot of husbands. So Misty says one's too many for her. So she's just like, So I'll find that out, what happens. That's sort of curious. I'll have to figure that out, because they talk about how if you attain a certain level, when you get into paradise and you have your own planet and all that. I'll have to see if I can't find that answer for us. So anyway, yes, ma'am. Yeah, there's a lot of them, and that's the thing about it, is we look at this as happening less than 200 years ago, and even with the Jehovah's Witnesses less than 150 years ago, and you look at that and you're like, man, that's just real recent. No, cults have been around for thousands of years, and so manipulating what the scriptures say, and so well, we'll call it a night.